Good afternoon. As Ray said, I've just written this book, actually, funnily enough, by the same title as the presentation. So in case you're wondering what it's called because you probably can't see it from the back of the room, all you have to do is look up here and you'll be able to figure that out. It's available on Amazon. And that's what we're going to talk about this afternoon. What I'd like to do is start by asking you a question. When was the last time you had a service experience that you walked away from and thought, that was amazing, truly amazing? In fact, so amazing that you could even remember it now. Can't think of one? Actually, neither can I. Part of the reason for that is because I think most of the service that we experience as consumers is pretty forgettable. And much like what you heard in the talk that Chris gave you this morning around how my brain is wired, because I think we think in a lot of the same ways. When I encounter bad service or service that wasn't very memorable, in fact, even when I encounter good service, just the way that I'm wired as a person causes me to want to step back and unpack that event. Try to figure out what was there about that that made it an interesting experience. And when I encounter service experiences that are not good, that don't go well, I often wonder to myself, how come these companies that do this don't do something like this and warn you when you call them or when you come in contact with them? Brace yourself. This is going to be worse than you thought. It's going to take longer than you thought. It's going to take more effort than you thought. And it's not going to produce the outcome that you had hoped for. So with that in mind, what I've done is tried to pull together some of these ideas and put them in this book. And I'm going to share some things with you this afternoon. So part of what I look at when I'm looking at these things is I try to figure out what challenges companies like you encounter. And I think the first thing that I start off with is that I think most companies do a pretty poor job of trying to figure out what the job is to be done. In other words, why as a customer of theirs have you even presented yourself, called them, gone online to their website? What's your mission? What's the real purpose that you're trying to resolve by reaching out to that company? Once we've figured that piece of it out, I think there are a lot of companies that are also not very good at doing efficient service in delivering whatever they're trying to deliver or trying to solve that problem. We're going to look at some of that as well. And then finally, I think even if you can do the first two things pretty well, trying to get to a point where that customer walks away from the experience they've had with you and they remember it. So when you think about things like Net Promoter and so on, what's that all about? It's really trying to create that memorable experience that you're now going to go and share with somebody else. In other words, what is it that needs to happen? How should it happen? And why does it even need to happen? So what I've done in this book, and luckily that eye chart's pretty small for you, so you have to buy the book to see it in bigger print. I've created something that I call the service trifecta. And what this really involves is it's an integrated systemic methodology built around three pillars of those things that I just mentioned. So it involves those jobs to be done, the process efficiency, and memorable encounters. So when I look at the experience that most customers have when they're encountering most companies or most places that they do business, it's not generally a single encounter. For the most part, when I come to you as your customer, we're going to be in this for a long time. And so when I think about that, I like to look at these lifetime journeys that a consumer is going to have with you over a long period of time to understand how we start someplace and how we build on that over time. And so when you think about it, even if I'm, let's say, a new customer, at some point I'm not a new customer anymore, I'm an existing customer, I want to build on that relationship and so on. Now, every time a customer or a prospect comes to you, they're going to have what I call episodes. So for example, the entire process of going through and onboarding a new customer is an episode. Once I become a customer, if I want to make a payment, I want to dispute a charge, something like that, each one of those could, on their own, be an episode. After a period of time, things are going well, I want to introduce a new product or service to you, that could create another episode. Within each of those episodes, we're going to have encounters. And so those encounters could involve a face-to-face visit in a branch, it could involve a phone call, it could involve a visit to the website, it could involve using the mobile app, something like that. But each one of those are going to be encounters beginning to end. And so if I look at it in this way, what I'm really trying to understand is what's the arc of that journey that somebody's going to be on over a period of time, and what's the link between each of these, because if I do each one of those encounters well, it gives me the opportunity to go to the next encounter with you, which is how we build that relationship over time. So what's interesting is if I think back to the presentation that Chris gave this morning, and by the way, we didn't coordinate that, it just happened this way. He touched on this, didn't he? When he said that, if we get a bunch of you in a room, everybody's got an idea, everybody's got solutions. And the idea here is that it's not that we have a problem coming up with a solution, we have a problem identifying the problem. What is it that we're actually trying to solve for? And that's what we mean when we talk about jobs to be done. What's the problem we're solving for? And so earlier when I talked to you about these episodes that someone might have, and then how that plays out over time and where that could create some frustration on the part of the customer, let me give you an example of what I mean by that. I recently was doing some work at a finance company, and I had the opportunity to go in and sit next to an agent, which is something I normally do because that's where the rubber meets the road. I want to find out when those agents are having discussions, phone calls, conversations with customers, what are they talking about? What kinds of things go back and forth between people, and how do those conversations flow? So let me give you an example of this particular agent I was sitting with. And by the way, when they normally do this, they always put me next to the best agent. So this is as good as it's going to get. I'm sitting next to this agent. This is an automotive finance company. Phone calls are coming in. Customer would say something like this. I just leased a new vehicle, and when you wrote that lease, I was expecting that you were going to take $400 a month out of my checking account. I've just been going through my statements, and I noticed that you're taking $410. What I want to know is, where's that $10 going? So you hear the agent, there's a lot of typing, type, pulls the account up and says, hello, Mrs. Smith, I've got your account right here in front of me, and I can see everything here, and I want to thank you for being a valued customer. Very nice to talk to you today. Your account looks fine. No, I know that. What I want to know is, where's that $10 going? A lot of typing, type. Okay, I'm looking at your account here, and there's no payment due at this time. No, I understand that. Where's that $10 going? Type. Well, ma'am, I'm looking at your account right now, and I don't see any errors here. Can I talk to your manager? So I listened to many calls that were like this. At a certain point, that agent turned and looked at me and said, am I being unpleasant? Am I being rude? Oh, no. She was actually the nicest person I've ever talked to. So at a certain point, I'm thinking, this is kind of interesting. If this is the best agent that you've got, what's going on here? So I get up and I go down the hall to the quality monitoring department. You hear that every time you call into these places, your call could be monitored for quality. I want to find these people. Who's doing this quality? So I go find them, and I say, okay, we're going to do a calibration session. I want you to pull the last phone call from this agent, get out your form on how you evaluate how we're doing around here, gather around, play the phone call. I want you to score this agent. Okay, so they've got their form out. They play the call, and then they go through and they say, well, did she greet the customer? Yes. Did she introduce herself? Yes. Did she ask if she has any other questions? Yes. Did she thank her for her service? Yes. 100%. Did you miss the part where it got transferred to a manager? Well, but customers, those pesky customers, they can be so demanding. All right. So when I look at things like that, it said to me that not only was the agent probably reading from a script and trying to stay on script and keep the customer on script, but the entire system was set up in such a way that they were really focused on how pleasant the agent was, how to apologize, how to offer a credit or a refund, but nobody here was doing the most important part of all. Do you remember when we were in grade school, the teacher would read a paragraph to you and then they would say to you, now, tell us what that means. You had to do reading comprehension. I equate the same thing here. How much problem comprehension do we put forth when we're having service encounters with our customers? How well do we actually understand what we ought to be focused on for that customer? In my mind, anytime we notice that there is a transfer or an escalation, it's a fail. It says that we either routed this customer to the wrong place to begin with, which is why there was a transfer, or we have improperly equipped that person to do their job, which is why it got escalated to a manager. Either way, from the customer standpoint, it's a failure. So let me ask you the first challenge question here, because I think this would be a really interesting way to do this. Think about in your own service environments, what would happen if we went to the customer and we've said, tell us what your issue is, and the customer describes their problem, and before we start solving, we say, fine, let me take that and rephrase it. I want to make sure I have captured your thoughts correctly. And then I want to ask you a question. Do you think I understand your problem well enough to begin solving it? Before I've started, do you think I even understand why you're calling? I don't know about you, but I think that'd be pretty powerful from the consumer standpoint if somebody asked me that question. So one of the things that I've done in the book at the end of each one of these 3 pillars is I've created a test, and you'll be able to see this in the book. The test has a bunch of questions in there so that you can go through and evaluate your own company. In this case, the first test is about jobs to be done, happens on page 31. So let me give you an example of one of the questions there. It says, our staff are assessed on their problem comprehension skills. I can bet you that if you have a quality monitoring department, we're really good at saying, are they friendly? Do they use the customer's name? Do they thank them for their business and things like that? But do we really try to understand whether or not our staff are figuring out the root cause of why that customer called? The second point that I'm trying to make in this book involves process efficiency. And so when you think about that, isn't it true that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line? So from your problem to my solution, the shorter we can make that line, not only are you going to be more likely to walk away satisfied as a customer, but I'm here to tell you that that's going to be the most cost-efficient way for you to deliver your service to the customer in any event. So when we're trying to figure out where we can cut cost out in the operation, draw that straight line. What's the shortest distance between problem and solution, and get rid of all the excess, and that's going to be the most efficient way for you to solve the problem. So earlier, I talked about the fact that, somehow this build didn't, there it goes, on the slide. I talked about those customer pain points and how they come in on that lifetime journey. What I've done on the right here is created a grid that talks about the typical kinds of reasons that drive why customers reach out to you, and in some cases where it's going to be a proactive or reactive response that you need to have. But in the light blue boxes there, one of the things that you'll notice is that there's some interesting pieces that happen there. In that upper left-hand light blue box, you'll notice that what I've called out is this notion that how much of what we are trying to resolve in that customer service encounter was caused by you. Meaning, we often talk about the customer had a query, right? They have a question. But how often is the question driven by the statement that you mailed them? Let me give you an example. There's a bank that I have used for several years now because I have a mortgage with them. Every September, they send me this letter, and they say, if we don't have a flood insurance policy on file for this condo, within 2 weeks, we're going to take out a flood insurance policy on your behalf, and we're going to bill you for it. And every year, the building manager mails the policy to them on time, no problem. Last year, we go through this thing, same deal. Every year, I get the letter. And for whatever reason, they didn't record the fact that the insurance had been taken out on time. So they send me another letter, and they say, guess what? We're billing you now $1,500, $2,000 for this flood insurance policy, and if you want to dispute that, call this number. So what do you think I did? Called the number. And when I called the number, what do you think they did when they answered the phone? They said, how can we help you? How do you think you can help me? You're the one that mailed me the letter. I called the number you told me to call. How about if we start with that? So what I'm trying to point out here is very often you've initiated a lot of this interaction with the customer in some of the ways that you behave toward them. So how much of that, from a service journey standpoint, are we wasting all these cycles trying to figure all this out when you should know the answer to that question? And so part of what I've tried to do through the years as a consultant is put together what I think is an efficient service delivery process, and I want to share that with you. So it starts off, this is pretty small, so I'm going to actually read it to you, but you'll see this, it'll be magic in a minute. It starts off by saying that every single time that we're going to have an encounter with a customer, we need to know a couple of basic things, don't we? We need to figure out who you are, and we need to know what you want at this moment in time. So that's going to be what we call the job to be done. And after we figured that out, we also need to try to understand what did we do in response to that? How did we react once we figured out the job that you wanted us to fix? And then ultimately we're trying to figure out from that the result. Was it good? Was it bad? How did we handle that? And then as we start to break that down and really get into the weeds a little bit, we're trying to figure out, based on the outcome, was the outcome desirable? Because once we can figure out what desirable outcomes look like, we can then begin making them repeatable. We can train agents on, we know what the good example looks like, so all you have to do is do it like this, and we'll have some success. And then we also know that if there is a certain path that a customer should take to solve that problem in the most efficient way possible, we can nudge them in that direction. So how do we, even if you started, for example, in chat, and we decide in chat that what you're asking me doesn't really fit in a chat session, we're better off talking on the phone. How do we take that and transition it to a voice transaction and keep the conversation going forward and not have to go backward? And so this becomes that service process. Every time that we're doing this, we're trying to accomplish this kind of a loop. Now, like Chris Colbert this morning, part of what I'm trying to do in unpacking all that, once we figure out the job to be done, the first thing that I'm really interested in is trying to understand, how did you get here? What was there in the way your brain is wired and how you think that made you decide that this channel, this time, this method is the right place for you to go to solve this problem? And once we can start to look at that, part of what I'm trying to also ask you on the delivery side is, what caused this problem to happen? So that grid that I showed you a minute ago that said how many things are generated from the customer's point of view, how many things are caused by you based on letters or actions that you might have taken with them, interactions they might have had in a branch, for example. So what caused this? So not just how did you get here, but what caused you to get here? And then here's the really interesting question. How would we know? How would we know? So some of the stuff that you're going to see out here is from technology companies today, and you're going to get to visit with some of them. But the real question is, how am I going to use that technology to help me figure out how you got here and what your job is that you're asking me to do? Once we figure that out, instead of looking at what did we do, what I'm really interested in here is what should we do. So any of you that have read The Experience Economy by Joe Pine, you'll know that one of the things he's really focused on is doing only and exactly what the customer wants. Nothing more and nothing less. Only and exactly. So for example, if you go to a coffee place on a regular basis and you like to order coffee, I don't know about you, I like my coffee black. So if I go there, there's no value in you offering me cream or sweetener. I'm not interested in any of that. I want it black. That's it. Only and exactly black. So if you put sweetener in there, I'm not interested. Only and exactly what I want. From that, what we're really trying to get down to is, how do we determine next best action and a subset of that, which would be next best offer? So part of when we think about next best action, a lot of this conversation is built around what does the customer want. I would argue you need to be thinking about what do you want, because you have something you want out of this deal as much as the customer. If nothing else, you're trying to figure out what my next opportunity is. And then once you've done that, you can figure out, should we even engage with you? Is this appropriate, or is this not a prospect that we even want to go after? And then from that, how should we engage? What's going to be the channel and the method that's going to be the most effective? When we look at the results, what we're also trying to figure out here is, what did we learn from this? How can we prevent this from happening to the next guy or from you the next time that you come and deal with us? Or how can we leverage that and make it better for the next guy? And if something happened here that wasn't good, is there a way for us to recover? How do we build service recovery into our entire process? Because as you know, if we have a service experience that doesn't go well and we recover from it in a timely manner, in many cases, the customers are going to look at that and be so impressed that they're going to say, I'm fine with that. That actually proves to me that you were paying attention and listening to my needs. And then ultimately, what we're trying to figure out from an efficiency standpoint is, how are people spending their time? How do they actually go about doing their job as they're serving the customer? And from that, then we can begin to find out where the opportunities are to drive new revenue or to shave some costs out of the overall operation. So that's a service delivery process. Now the second question for you on the challenge side here is, based on everything we know, the real question we should be asking in a service encounter is, what should we do at this moment in time? And I think ultimately, the thing that I would find interesting is, if you think about all those post-interaction surveys that we like to do, instead of asking, did you like us? Did you like the agent? Were they friendly? What would happen if we got rid of all of them and replaced it with a single question? Did we waste your time? Because time is the most important commodity any of us have, and I don't care how rich you are, you can't buy another minute on this planet. So the ultimate way I can show you respect is to show you respect for your time. The next test in the book talks about a service efficiency, another set of 10 questions. Here's an example of one of those questions. We do not ask customers to repeat information we should already know. How many people have called into the IVR? The IVR says, please put in your account number. You put in your account number. It plays you a menu. Actually, what I want is none of those things, so I opt out to speak to an agent. And what's the first thing the agent says? What's your account number? Great example of how we're just wasting time here. That's just sloppy technology. You shouldn't be accepting that. There's no reason for it, because you're asking your customer to be the glue holding your operation together. I like this quote from Maya Angelou, saying that I've learned that the people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they will never forget how they made you feel. So a lot of what Chris talked about this morning, and even Bruno's story, if you remember, was based around how people feel, because that's the thing that creates the memory that we're so interested in creating here. So when we're talking about memories, obviously, from a company standpoint, we always want good memories, don't we? That's what drives Net Promoter and repeat business and causes people to say nice things about us, positive word of mouth. So that's always a good thing. As I mentioned a moment ago, even when there's a bad memory, if you do a good job of recovering from that, you can turn that around and still use it to your advantage if it's detected in time and acted on. But the worst sin of all is when there's no memory. You've spent all this time and money and effort from a marketing standpoint, branding standpoint, and the customer can't remember who you are. They have no idea. So they're not going to tell anybody anything because they don't remember. Worst thing of all. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about here. A couple of weeks ago, I realized I was out of checks, and I needed to order some. Probably the lowest level transaction a bank should ever have to deal with. So I go online, can't find where I'm supposed to order these checks. Great. Pick up the phone and I call. I get into self-service, I get the IVR, it plays all the menu options there. Check ordering isn't one of them. So guess what? I have to opt out and speak to an agent. So I'm thinking, okay, good deal. I'm going to explain my issue. I want to order a box of checks. And the agent says to me, oh, I'm sorry, but I can't do that for you. I have to transfer you to the check order department. So they transfer me to the check order department, and I get over there, and the guy types and types and types, and he says, I can't find your account. I've been with this bank for 20 years. Can't find your account in here. Because I can't find your account, I can't authenticate you. Therefore, what I'm going to have to do is transfer you back to customer service, who stays on the line, because then they have to authenticate me and transfer me back to the check order department again. And you look at this and think, how many people does it take to order a box of checks? I mean, this is just insane. Now, what I want to lay over the top of this is the emotional journey that I was on. Bruno talked about this in his piece this morning when he was showing you the experience he had at the hotel. I'm using the same kind of an approach here as well, which says, when I started out in self-service, I was kind of neutral on the whole thing. When I got to customer service, I was thinking, great, it's a live body, they're going to help me, except when they didn't, this thing started going off a cliff. Any of you who have been followers of Daniel Kahneman will know that he talks a lot about the peak end rule. So one of the things I'm interested in here when we look at this emotional journey that somebody is on is contrast. So not everything needs to be a trip to Disneyland. Everything needs some contrast in there, because that's the thing that will cause you to appreciate when things are going well. But what's equally important is to understand where this ended. So when we're all done, what's the memory I'm going to be left with when I walk away from this? That's the part that I'm going to share with other people. Challenge question number 3. If we went out to your customers after they've had a service encounter with you and asked them, what's one word that you can think of that would describe the experience you just had with us? What kinds of things do you think your customers would say about you? So we get to test number 3, same drill. But here's an interesting question that I've pulled out of that test. We have a method of quantifying the value of a memory. Anybody here been to Disney World? Do you think that they don't have a way of quantifying the value of a memory? That's what they do. That's their entire marketing plan. How do you think they figure out how they're going to make money? They place a value on memory. That's what it's all about. So I want you to listen to this part because it's really important. If you believe the things that Chris talked about in his piece at the setup this morning and the concepts that I've shared with you today, you're going to realize that if you go back to your office and you want to start making change happen, you're not going to do it on your own. You're going to need help. It's going to require a lot of people to collaborate with and to share ideas. And part of what's going to happen when you do that, as you heard in that talk this morning, is people are going to resist. People don't like change. We're creatures of habit. We like things to be the same way that they've been always. And so in order for you to try to figure out why people are resisting, you first have to understand why they're incented to not understand what you're trying to do, okay? So if you're going to have that discussion around change management, you're going to have to be very clear in saying to people, what are you asking them to do specifically? How do you tell them this is the mission that we're on? You're going to have to tell them, why am I asking you to do it? What is there that you have specifically as skills, or what do you bring to the party that makes you special? Why am I asking you to do it? And you're going to have to explain to them what's in it for you. Why, if there's no value proposition for them, they're not going to help you on this journey of changing to overcome some of the things that we've talked about. There's a test in there as well for change management. And one of the questions I pulled out here is, are employees openly accept change and work within that process to make change successful? So by design, is your company set up in such a way that you see change as a friend and not as an enemy? So where do we go from here? I think you need to spend some time thinking about your brand. What kind of a brand promise do we make to our customer? And as you're doing that, don't confuse customer journeys with your internal workflows. We're all guilty of doing this, aren't we? The customer calls us about, oh, sorry, here's our process, this is our procedure, our method. Guess what? Customers don't give a rat's nose about your process. They care about getting their problem solved. So how do we understand their journey and trying to solve that problem? Take the test in the book, go through and answer those questions and find out where your vulnerabilities are in your organization so that you can, instead of just trying to boil the entire ocean, you can nail this down and get it figured out pretty carefully. And then map the gap from where you want to be to where you are now. How am I going to do that? So as you go through and take those tests, you could probably use something like this grid on the left here that would say, let me put all my scores in there, because there's a scoring methodology where you get points for all that. Enter your scores at an arm's length. You're going to be able to circle it and say, that one there is where I have a weakness that I need to go focus. And one of the things that I would really encourage you to do too, especially as you've been through this conference, there's a lot of information being presented to you, a lot of things that you try to process here, but I would encourage you, while you can, while you're in the moment, while things are really buzzing around inside your head, take a moment and write down 2 or 3 things that you know you need to do when you get back to the office. Don't make one of those things, oh, I'm going to get back to the office and think about everything I just heard for the last couple of days, because you'd be overwhelmed. Do it in the moment and say, right now, I just heard something that really resonated with me. I need to do that. And then try to figure out, when I am back there in the office, as I mentioned, I'm going to have friends. So who do I need to go talk to about this? Who do I need to collaborate with? What do I need to tell them? Put some dates around it. If you just say it's a 2025 project, I'm here to tell you it'll never happen. Put some dates around it, and I'm also going to tell you that in my experience as a consultant, the customers that put the most aggressive dates in there were the ones that saw results. Think about somebody like Steve Jobs. Remember, you've heard all these stories about him where he'd go to the designers of the iPhone and say, I want this thing, and they'd say, okay, it'll be ready in a month, and he'd say, I need it by tomorrow morning. And people would freak out, and they'd be up all night. Magically, it happened. I'm just saying, put some aggressive dates out there and some aggressive goals for people, and you'll be surprised at what happens. And finally, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to work with you and do anything I can to try to help you through this process, but I encourage you to get the book, take a look at it. I think you'll find it's a good use of your time. Thanks very much for your time today.